I'll never forget that Halloween night on Elm Street. It was the night I learned that some stories aren't just rumors, they're warnings. It all started when my friends Jake, Lily, and I dared each other to explore the old house everyone said was haunted. I didn't believe in ghosts back then, but I do now. The house stood at the end of a long, twisted road. Its windows were shattered, and the wooden door hung crookedly on rusty hinges. We joked as we pushed open the door, but the moment we stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was heavy, and it smelled like dust and decay, as if the house had been dead for years. We wandered through the dark hallways, our footsteps echoing in the silence. Every creak of the floor sent chills down my spine, but I kept telling myself it was just an old house. That's when we heard it, the sound of the front door slamming behind us. At first I thought it was the wind, but then I noticed something. The windows were all sealed shut, and there wasn't a breeze. It's just a coincidence, I told myself, though my voice didn't even convince me. We entered what looked like the living room, and that's when things got worse. We heard footsteps, slow, heavy, and dragging, but no one was there. My heart pounded in my chest as we huddled together, listening in fear. I could feel the cold presence of something, watching us. Jake, trying to be brave, called out, "Who's there?" His voice echoed, but there was no answer, just more footsteps getting closer. Suddenly, the lights flickered on. I'll never forget what I saw. A shadowy figure stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at us. It didn't have a face, just darkness where its features should be. It didn't move, but I could feel its cold gaze piercing right through me. "We need to leave," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. But when we turned to run, the door was gone. In its place was a solid wall, like the house itself had trapped us inside. Panic set in. We ran through every room, but no matter where we went, the walls kept shifting. The house was playing with us, like a cat with its prey. Finally, we stumbled into a room we hadn't seen before, an old bedroom. On the bed was a dusty diary, open to the last page. It read, "I can hear them. I can't escape. I belong to the house now." As I read the words, the door behind us slowly creaked open. We bolted out of the house, not daring to look back. Somehow, we made it outside, gasping for breath. The house loomed behind us, silent once again. To this day, I don't know what that figure was, or why the house let us go. But every time I pass by Elm Street, I feel that cold presence watching. And I know it's waiting for the next group of curious kids who don't believe the stories. And this time, it might not let them leave. It was Halloween night, and a thick fog had settled over the town, making the streets look ghostly and unfamiliar. The flickering light from the jack-o'-lanterns cast eerie shadows on the ground, while the cool wind rattled the dry leaves, making them swirl like whispers in the dark. Trick-or-treaters had started to head home, their bags filled with candy, but my friends and I had one more stop to make. We weren't interested in candy or costumes this year. Instead, we had dared each other to visit the old Wilkins house, the creepy abandoned mansion on the hill at the edge of town. No one had lived there in decades, and the rumors about the place were endless. Some said it was cursed. Others claimed it was haunted by the ghost of old Mr. Wilkins, who had disappeared mysteriously one Halloween night many years ago. We met at the corner near Maple Street, me, Claire, Matt, and Jason, all bundled up against the chilly night air. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the empty streets. "You sure about this?" Claire asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Come on," Jason said, trying to sound brave but clearly just as nervous as the rest of us. "It's just an old house. We'll go in, take a quick look around, and leave. Nothing's going to happen." Matt laughed. "You're not scared of some old ghost stories, are you?" I didn't answer, but deep down, something about this felt wrong. The Wilkins house was more than just a decaying mansion. It had a presence, a kind of silent warning that told you to stay away. Still, I didn't want to be the one to back out. We walked through the thickening fog, the trees overhead swaying in the wind, their branches like bony fingers reaching out to us. The gate to the house was rusted and creaked loudly as we pushed it open. The house loomed in front of us, its windows broken and its roof sagging. The front door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting us in. "Let's go," Jake said, taking a deep breath and leading the way up the cracked stone steps. Inside, the house was even more unsettling. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled stale like a place forgotten by time. The wooden floor creaked under our weight as we slowly moved through the front hall. A grand staircase led up to the second floor, its banister rotted and broken in places. We split up to explore, staying within sight of each other but fanning out through the rooms. Every corner was filled with shadows that seemed to shift in the dim light of our flashlights. There were strange marks on the walls, almost like scratches but too high up to have been made by animals. "It's cold in here," Claire said, rubbing her arms. "I don't like this." Jason wandered over to an old, dusty piano in the corner. "Think this still works?" he joked, pressing a key. To our surprise, a low, haunting note echoed through the room, lingering longer than it should have. We all froze, staring at each other. "That was creepy," Matt muttered. Just then, we heard a sound from upstairs, a slow, steady creak, like someone walking across the floor. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Probably just the wind," Jason said, though his voice wavered. Another creak, louder this time, closer. It was unmistakable. Footsteps. "We're not alone," I said, my heart pounding. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut behind us, the sound reverberating through the house. We spun around, but no one was there. The room felt colder, the shadows seemed to stretch, and the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. "We need to get out of here," Claire said, panic rising in her voice. Before we could move, the footsteps upstairs quickened, coming towards the stairs. There was no mistaking it now. Someone, or something, was up there. We stood frozen in place, listening in terror as the unseen presence reached the top of the stairs. And then, we saw it. A dark figure appeared at the top of the staircase. It was tall, with a faint, glowing outline, and its face, if it had one, was hidden in shadow. The figure didn't move, but we could feel its gaze on us, cold and menacing. The air around us felt thick, pressing in on us from all sides. "We have to go, now!" I shouted, breaking the spell. We bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The handle was ice cold, and no matter how hard we pulled, it wouldn't open. The figure began to move, descending the stairs slowly, one deliberate step at a time. "Find another way out," Matt yelled, his voice filled with fear. We ran through the house, frantically trying doors and windows, but every exit was sealed tight, as if the house itself didn't want us to leave. The figure was getting closer, its footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Finally, Jason found a small window in the kitchen that wasn't locked. He smashed it with his flashlight, and one by one we scrambled through, cutting ourselves on the broken glass but too terrified to care. We ran into the foggy night, not stopping until we were far from the house. When we finally looked back, the house was dark and silent again, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. We had seen it, the thing that haunted the old Wilkins house. And though we escaped that night, I knew we had come too close to something we didn't understand. The house at the end of Maple Street still stands, abandoned and forgotten. But every Halloween night, when the fog rolls in, I remember the figure at the top of the stairs. And I wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't gotten out in time? And I'll never go near that house again. My name is Ethan, and this is the story of the worst decision I ever made. It was Halloween night when my friends and I decided to go into Hollow Grove. Everyone in our town had heard the stories about the woods, the strange lights that appeared late at night, leading people deep into the forest only for them to never come back. People called it the lantern, and it was always followed by whispered warnings, stay out of the woods, especially on Halloween. And like most teens, we thought we were invincible. So when Lucas came up with the idea to find the lantern, we didn't think twice. Besides, nothing had ever really happened to anyone we knew, just stories passed down from older kids who probably made it all up. It was me, Lucas, Emma, and Jake. Lucas was the one who suggested going, always looking for the next thrill. Jake was his usual fearless self, and Emma, though she seemed nervous, agreed to come along because she didn't want to be left out. As for me, I didn't want to be the only one to back down. We met at the edge of Hollow Grove around 10 p.m., after most of the trick-or-treaters had gone home. The moon was high, but the thick canopy of trees made everything darker than it should have been. A cold breeze swept through the air, carrying the sound of rustling leaves and making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You guys ready for this?" Lucas asked, a grin on his face, though I could see a hint of uncertainty in his eye. "Yeah," Jake said, slapping Lucas on the back. "Let's find this ghost lantern." Emma didn't say anything, but she nodded. I could tell she was scared, and honestly, so was I. But none of us wanted to admit it. We switched on our flashlights and stepped into the woods. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. The sounds of the town faded behind us, replaced by the eerie silence of the forest. Every now and then, we'd hear the snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves, and my heart would race, even though it was probably just an animal. "So, what's the plan?" Emma asked after a few minutes. Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. We keep walking until we see something," Lucas said, his voice steady. "The lights usually appear deeper in the woods, right?" "That's what everyone's." I heard they come out after midnight," Jake added. "Maybe we'll have to wait a while." The thought of staying in the woods until midnight made my stomach turn, but I didn't say anything. We kept walking, the beams of our flashlights barely cutting through the thick darkness. The trees seemed to close in on us, their branches like twisted arms reaching. After what felt like an hour, we reached a small clearing. Lucas stopped and looked around. "This seems like a good spot to wait," he said. "We can stay here until we see something." We sat down on the cold, damp ground, our flashlights resting in our laps. The minutes dragged on in silence. I could feel my anxiety rising with every passing second. What were we even doing out here, chasing some stupid ghost story? Just as I was about to suggest we leave, something happened. A faint light appeared in the distance, deep in the woods. "There," Lucas whispered, his voice filled with excitement. "Do you see?" We all turned our heads toward the light. It was dim at first, flickering like a flame in the wind. But as we watched, it grew brighter, slowly floating closer. "That's it," Jake said, standing up. "The lantern." Emma grabbed my arm. "Ethan, we should go. I don't like that." I didn't like it either. The light looked wrong, too steady, too deliberate. But Lucas was already on his feet, stepping toward the light. "Come on, guys. We came here for this, didn't we?" Before I could say anything, Jake followed him. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to run, but something kept me there, rooted to the spot. We have to follow them," I told Emma. She didn't argue, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Together, we hurried after Lucas and Jake. The light moved deeper into the woods, bobbing and swaying as if leading us somewhere. We followed, our footsteps crunching against the fallen leaves, the air growing colder with each step. The light seemed to pulse, drawing us in like moths to a flame. That's when I realized something was wrong. The trees around us had changed. They were no longer the tall, familiar pines that we'd seen when we first entered the woods. These trees were twisted, gnarled, their branches covered in thick black moss. The path beneath our feet was no longer dirt and leaves, but a hard, rocky surface. Lucas, Jake," I called, but they didn't respond. They were ahead of us, still following the light, unaware of how different the forest had become. "We need to turn back," Emma whispered, gripping my arm tighter. "This isn't right." I nodded, fear gripping my chest, but when I turned around, the path we had come from was gone. The trees closed in behind us, forming a wall of darkness. We were trapped. The light, now just a few feet away, stopped moving. It hovered in the air, glowing brighter than before, almost blinding. And then, without warning, it vanished. We stood in complete darkness, our flashlights flickering and then going out one by one. I could hear Emma's rapid breathing, the silence around us pressing in like a weight. What now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before I could answer, a low, whispering voice filled the air, echoing through the trees. It was soft at first, like the wind through the leaves, but it grew louder, clearer, until I could make out the words, "You shouldn't have come." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding us, pulling us in. I grabbed Emma's hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the leaves. We turned, shining our flashlights toward the sound. There was nothing there. You shouldn't have come." The voice was closer now, and the footsteps were getting louder. Panic surged through me as I realized we weren't alone. Something was in the woods with us. We need to find Lucas and Jake," I said, pulling Emma forward. "We need to get out of." We ran blindly through the dark forest, calling for our friends, but there was no answer. The whispers followed us, growing louder, more urgent. I could feel something watching us, something closing in. Finally, we reached another clearing, and there, lying on the ground, were Lucas and Jake. They weren't moving. "Lucas, Jake!" I shouted, rushing to their side. Emma knelt beside Jake, shaking him. "Wake up, please!" But they didn't wake. Their eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the sky, their faces pale as if the life had been drained from them. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I looked around the clearing. The trees seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their twisted branches swaying without wind. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. "You shouldn't have come." I grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her to her feet. "We need to run, now." We turned to leave, but the path was gone again, the trees closing in, their branches reaching out like claws. The whispers were inside my head now, echoing through my mind, telling me I would never leave, that we had trespassed where we didn't belong. And then I saw it. The lantern. It was back, hovering just beyond the trees, its light flickering as it slowly approached. This time there was no escape. The lantern was coming for us, and I knew in that moment that the stories were true. We never should have come,